Tonight I want to go through two contrasting articles in the Australian national newspaper on the subject of taking the knee in the sporting world, which is the anti-racism gesture sparked by Nike spokesman Colin Kaepernick in the US nearly 5 years ago. For those of you who don't know, it started out as one man's own protest on the football field during the national anthem against police brutality. But with the ever-increasing prominence of the Black Lives Matter movement and the increasing political polarisation on race in the United States, taking the knee has come to be seen as an essential act against racism all over the world in professional sports, and it's been adopted in all sorts of sports, from Formula One, where it's led by drivers like Lewis Hamilton, all the way through to tennis, with varying degrees of conformity, of course. Now, the first article is penned by Janet Albrechtsen, who's one of the more right-wing cultural commentators at the National Broadsheet, and a former solicitor and member of the Institute of Public Affairs, the right-wing think tank. Now, I guess she'd pass for what the ABC might call one of Rupert Murdoch's culture warriors, but regardless of her political leanings, she is an incredibly intelligent and a seriously accomplished Australian woman with an acerbic wit to which even a Hank Moody type character might tip their fedora. Let's check it out. Knee-jerk gesture does nothing to combat racism. Quinton de Kock and Cricket South Africa have done a great thing this past week, and not just for cricket. The kerfuffle over the international cricketer's quiet refusal, then public turnaround, to follow the mandatory instruction from his country's sporting body that players take the knee at cricket matches has moved us closer to realising that this gesture has had its day. The cricketer made no statement to accompany his refusal initially, believing he was entitled to his private opinions. Some used that silence as reason enough to rush to an awful judgment that he must be racist if he is unwilling to show solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. Media and Twitter classes leapt at the opportunity to claim Quinton was just another racist white guy in a country with, let's face it, a very long history of racism. But all of this completely ignored the facts of his mixed race heritage and his previous complete silence with regard to his actual stance on the issue. And so, of course, they filled in the blanks. And far be it for this white guy to deign an opinion on the matter, but this is the problem with seeing every aspect of reality through the prisms of race and other immutable characteristics, and then reducing action on those characteristics to mere symbolism, like taking a knee. Because taking a knee is inherently theatre, and to demand or force a gesture so semantically overloaded as proof of any individual's statements on race relations in any country, let alone the world stage, is to reduce a complex issue as old as the differences between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens to a 160-character Twitter fight, which typically means whoever can say the most outlandish things about their opponent will generate the most attention and therefore wins at Twitter. Back to the article. Public flagellation has nothing to do with private virtue. By making it compulsory for players, Cricket South Africa removed any last vestiges of meaning from dropping to a knee before a ball has been bowled. De Kock has since apologised for the hurt that his decision caused, and in a 3-page letter revealed that, quote, "My half-sisters are coloured and my stepmum is black. For me, black lives have mattered since before I was born, not just because there was an international movement." American philosopher Eric Hoffer once remarked that America has not been a good milieu for the rise of mass movements. What starts out here as a mass movement ends up as a racket, a cult, or a corporation. Now, what started as an individual protest by Colin Kaepernick has managed to become all three: a racket, a cult, and a corporatist tool. When the American footballer decided to kneel during the national anthem before a match back in 2016, he explained that he would not stand as a mark of respect for a country that continues to oppress black people. De Kock's quiet defiance made it clear that taking the knee had become a pro forma act of compliance, particularly for South African cricketers, a mandated branding exercise in the case of the South African cricket body. And I think this is Janet's key point, that in this particular circumstance, the interplay between Cricket South Africa's player associations and its governing bodies and the players themselves that they're making demands of makes the issue a little bit more complicated than bending the knee to symbolise your distaste for racial discrimination. After all, she finishes, taking the knee isn't the same as lifting a finger to combat racism. De Kock may have caved to pressure, but his initial defiance and letter will one day be seen as part of a new and different movement, one that recognises that empty gestures are favoured mostly by unthinking and lazy followers and marketing people who are in the business of building a brand, not combating racism. Now, in a lot of cases, I think that's true. It's a gesture as empty of any real impact as Leonardo DiCaprio's stubborn refusal to retire his private jet in exchange for a Zoom call when it comes to combating climate change. But now let's go through an article by Gideon High. Most of you probably won't be familiar with his work, as I believe The Australian is the only place he's actually published, but in my humble opinion, he's probably the best sports writer in the country and maybe one of the better cricket writers on the planet. And far from just a sporty statistician, he's also had plenty to say over the last year on the abuse that Victorian families have suffered at the hands of our own government. He's at least as witty as Janet Albrechtsen and has a hilarious turn of phrase from time to time, but he knows what side his bread is buttered on as a writer for The Australian, the so-called right-wing rag, which makes this article of his frankly all the more impressive. All things being equal, players should take the knee. Last week, a left-handed batsman keeper said something pretty brave about the process of taking an anti-racist knee before games. No, not Quinton de Kock. Ben Dunk, this gentleman here, for the Stars. Dunk is a journeyman T20 player who last season did not join Melbourne Stars teammates taking a knee before Big Bash League matches. In an excellent interview with the Daily Telegraph's Ben Horn, Dunk expressed regret at having been so selfish and self-absorbed as to have ignored the opportunity to do the right thing. Now, Dunk was being hard on himself, but also clear-headed. In hindsight, he realised he had been naive not to have realised that the conversation would so quickly shift to who is taking a knee and who's not. He here identified what was to entangle de Kock. The weight of symbolism of taking a knee is now borne by its opposite, which is entirely true. Now, this is where it gets interesting. During the week, my colleague Janet Albrechtsen devoted her much-read column to the growing popularity of taking a knee, from its origins 5 years ago when San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick was galvanised by a wave of police violence against people of colour. As Albrechtsen put it, Kaepernick's protest attracted attention from the then US President Donald Trump down. But it did more than attract attention from Trump. The gesture cost Kaepernick his career, and Trump was widely supported when he said that NFL players who emulated the quarterback were sons of bitches who should also be fired. Now, idiosyncrasies and quite often just idiocy of the former US president aside, I need to correct this statement. Kaepernick most certainly did lose his NFL career, but it had nothing to do with the woke gesture. I think if the hosts of ESPN have taught me anything in the hundreds of minutes that I've seen of them over the years, it's that sporting and corporate bodies love the sort of stuff Colin Kaepernick was doing. In fact, Nike started throwing millions of dollars at him the moment this gesture took off in the press. What did cost Colin Kaepernick was, quite frankly, the fact that he was on the way out. He sucks. With all the promise of a rising star, Jaden Stevenson.
3 to Reid, 2 to Thomas, 4 to Mychek.
Stevenson with the barrel. He's gone onto it. That's gone 80. Bring back the barrel.
Yes.
And all the follow-through of a rising star, Jaden Stevenson, in his third year. The San Francisco 49ers why 49ers? Why not 37ers or 16? Anyway, San Francisco got rid of him because, as a company that routinely hands out tens of millions of dollars to its best players, Kaepernick was not good enough. The more conspiratorial might even draw a link between his declining performance after only a few years as backup quarterback and his decision to become a civil rights activist, but I'll leave that sort of commentary to the Stephen Crowders of the world. It was performance that ended Kaepernick's career, not a racist gesture. The keep politics out of sport crowd would do well to remember that social injustice warriors have done at least as much politicising as their counterparts. While true, I think there's a difference between reactionary injustice warriors and the driving force in the first place. But look, were it so easy, I'm not sure the Australian teams would have made such heavy weather of it, undergoing protracted agonies last year about how to respond to the criticisms of their inaction from Michael Holding, adopting the compromise barefoot circle at home, which is just weird stuff, and then arriving at their current Me Too policy on tour where they take a knee if opponents do. And if the cost is less now than it was for Kaepernick, then it is because the more athletes have joined in, the harder it has grown to victimise individuals. Which, if you genuinely value freedom, seems worth celebrating. Why should anyone have to forego their livelihood for what they believe? Why should only martyrdom be deemed meaningful? Which is absolutely true. And as one of the few people left in Victoria who doesn't see freedom as some sort of obscure Trumpian concept to be mocked by public servants with freedoms, nobody should have to forego their livelihoods for what they believe. But Gideon, that's exactly what happened to Quinton de Kock, who was wrested from the game by his own side for refusing to kneel. At least we know 100% his money is where his mouth is. There will be cricketers for whom subscribing to a stance on racism and inclusion is a matter of obedience and conformism, like de Kock. There will also be those to whom it is not. There'll be others still who do not feel so strongly, but assent as an act of collegiality with those who do. This doesn't seem to make it more coercive than any other idea. There will, at the same time, be those who object to the ritual, also for varying reasons, and these will include bigots. There will also be those who feel uncomfortable with what they see as, say, the trivialization of serious issues and or the weaponizing of wokeness, which is what Janet was getting at. And actually, held in good faith, these views are entitled to respect. The modern American campus is an ugly, fearful place. Amen, Gideon. To them I'd say this: cricket is a part of our colonial inheritance that has historically drawn great strength and prestige from its association with and representation of the nation. The execration of de Kock, it is true, was all out of proportion to his offence. It involved a rush to judgment that ignored both de Kock's own background and the aggravating factor of the mistrust between South Africa's hard-pressed players and their brawling administrators. But the symbolism of the Ernest Temba Bavuma kneeling, who's the South African captain, whilst the insouciant de Kock stood, was perfectly repulsive in the context of that country. Gideon wraps up. A change is underway. Arguably, it's overdue. It's time Cricket Australia and the players agreed a more comprehensive and less ad hoc response. Actions do speak louder than symbols, so why not turn our minds to what these actions could be? I'm well aware that among readers of The Australian, this position is as unpopular as Albrechtson's is popular. That, of course, is all the more reason to articulate it. The case for a game prepared to feel uncomfortable on occasions in acknowledgement of its representational responsibilities, challenges, and shortcomings. If all you feel when racial equality is discussed is boredom, irritation, and resentment, people trying to make you feel bad and do your country down, well, maybe have another think, says Gideon, because the principles enunciated should really be, as Ben Dunk put it, a no-brainer. Something to think about, no? I mean, the principles really should be a no-brainer. They're pretty uncontroversial. But as with just about everything else touched by politics, and particularly sport, the symbolism is infinitely more complicated than the surface political reality. That's not a problem that's going away anytime soon, and although taking the knee might be a little bit 2020 at this stage and is, it seems, on the way out as a universal act before every sporting match, the conversation is not whether or not people should be forced to take a knee, which is really a symbol of subservience before it was a symbol of anti-racism. It's something that would make me a little uncomfortable, but maybe that's the idea. Maybe we're supposed to feel uncomfortable enough about it to at least have that 20-second conversation with the people around us. Gideon, I love your work, and let's give Perth the flick and bring the Ashes home to Tasmania for Tim Paine's final stint as captain in the last game of the Ashes, I say. See you all on Wednesday, 9 PM Eastern Daylight. Cheers.